we are looking at the production of a very specific yet fungible figure that shows up in historical, scientific, literary, and political discourse again and again, starting in the modern age. In the 19th century, this figure would have been called variously the native woman, the colonized woman, the oppressed woman, the favorite subject of colonial discourse and policy. In the 20th and early 21st centuries, she is called the, quote, third world woman, end quote, a label that connotes much of the same as those from the century before, but is also a reference to the extent to which her nation-state has entered into global capitalism. The most recent large-scale detonation of this term was immediately after 9/11, as America and our Western allies prepared to move into Afghanistan. Today, the term third world is outdated, but the figure at the heart of this imperialist discourse remains. What terms do we use today to discuss the object of Western policy and saviorism? Let's review a central concept, colonialism. Colonialism is a policy or practice of acquiring full or partial political control over another country, occupying it with settlers, and exploiting it economically. Colonialism has evident economic and political hierarchies within it. It's also a term used by feminists of color in the US and abroad to describe the appropriation of their experiences and struggles by the hegemonic white women's movement. It implies a relation of structural domination and discursive or political suppression. Mohanty's subject in this essay is the production of the third world woman as a singular monolithic subject in Western feminist texts. Let's spend some time parsing Mohanty's thesis, which comes at the end of page 62. Point 1. One of the most important projects of feminist theory is to examine the relationship between the representation of women in various types of discourse and actual women on the ground and their lives. So much of how women are treated on the ground, how policies that affect women's access to health, the air and they and their children breathe, their ability to feed their families, even their safety from war, has to do with assumptions made based on representation. Point 2. As we discussed in the beginning of this lecture, colonize implies a relation of structural domination and discursive or political suppression of the heterogeneous subject. In other words, Mohanty is arguing that Western feminists have created a representation that reduces all of the different kinds of women in the so-called third world to one stereotype of an oppressed woman who needs to be saved. This is an act of colonization, discursively, but perhaps more critically, because it shapes Western governments and non-governmental organizations' policies toward and treatment of actual countries, societies, and people. Point 3. To go even deeper, Western feminists not only reduce women in the third world to one singular figure, but they argue that this third world woman is different than Western women, and that she is different primarily because she is oppressed, and they are not. Point 4. Finally, because Western feminist writing does indeed have so much power, both within academia and in the field of foreign relations, economics, politics, and culture, this colonization needs to be named and called out. And this is what Mohanty does here. As I mentioned before, Western feminism plays an outsized role, at times, in the shaping of foreign policy and even military decisions. Let's look at a concrete example. Pause this lecture and watch the short excerpt from Democracy Now! On the First Feminist War. You can find the link in the YouTube notes. Let's talk about the assumption that women are already constituted as a coherent group with identical interests and desires. To put it another way, Western feminist discourse, often talked about Afghan or Iraqi women without an intersectional lens, as if they were all the same and all had the same oppression and the same goals. They did not recognize that women from different classes would have different needs, that women of different religious backgrounds may have lived very different lives, etc. In particular, women are seen as powerless. When we look at our own society, we can see that it is obviously not true that all women have the same lack of power. What happens when we focus only on women's supposed powerlessness? Here are the 5 specific ways in which women as a category of analysis constructs third world women as a homogeneous, powerless group and turns them into objects. 1. Women as victims of male violence. 2. Women as universal dependents. Married women as victims of the colonial process. Women and familial systems. Or the idea that it's only in the family that women are constructed as women. And women and the development process. It assumes development is analogous with economic development and economic progress. This means if Western feminists look at a specific practice, like female genital cutting, they assume that it is practiced the same way in all African countries, that all girls and women have a similar experience, and that often the practice has been around since time immemorial. There is an analytic leap from a practice to an assertion of its general significance in controlling women. 2. It assumes that a concept has the same meaning across time and locations. And 3. It mistakes representation for material reality. Most Western feminist representations of third world women assumed that the primary power struggle in their lives was between themselves as women and men. Common mistakes are the assumption that women are always seen in opposition to men, patriarchy is always necessarily male dominance, and 3, religious, legal, economic, and family systems are assumed to be constructed by men. Is this really how women in the West represent themselves? As being in a struggle for power with all men? What happens when we make assumptions like this? For example, right now there is a mass resistance movement of women in Iran against the compulsory wearing of the hijab or abaya. If we took this Western feminist approach, we would assume that it is Iranian women fighting against the Iranian men who forced them to wear such clothing. However, if you actually looked at what was happening on the ground, you would see that boys and men are supporting their sisters, mothers, daughters, and friends in this resistance. And that is the Iranian people, led by the youth, against the old guard religious authority. So what kind of analysis is Mohanty advocating for? She has 8 points. I'm going to read them to you, and I'm going to give you a page number so you can look back. Number 1, focus on uncovering the material and ideological specificities that constitute a group of women as powerless in a particular context. Page 66. Page 73, go local. Analyze the effect of certain historically and culturally specific modes of patriarchal organization. 3. Page 73. Look at how the category of woman is constructed in a variety of political contexts that often exist at the same time and are overlaid on top of one another. 4. Page 73. Pay attention to how women in a local context resist, challenge, and subvert a specific process of economic or cultural exploitation. Page 75. Look at the different meanings produced by similar practices in various contexts. Number 6, page 76. When using feminist concepts, ensure that we are not assuming their meaning remains static throughout place and time. Number 7, pay attention to the complex and mobile relationships between a group's historical materiality on the level of specific oppressions and political choices on the one hand, and how they are generally represented on the other. And then 8, look at the role of certain groups of women in constructing religious, economic, familial, and political phenomena.